Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 8 of MOOC 10, Cryptocurrency and Central Banking. It's nice to be back. I know you've been gone for several weeks and 6 sessions with Andreas Antonopoulos. Hopefully everyone now knows how to use a wallet, send a transaction, and you're halfway there to being a technical guru on Bitcoin. We are now back with the more financial aspects of cryptocurrencies, and we actually have a great set of questions that I'm going to go through, and I think we'll be pretty much fully booked for this session, but I will keep an eye on the live chat as we're going through and see if anything else comes up. Okay. First question, what are the attributes of it says fiat currency, though what I'm going to call it is a sovereign currency, a national currency, that are, e.g. USD, that are missing from BTC to be the next global reserve currency? And I think that's actually a good question, because this is a topic we hear about a lot, a topic that many people in the field promote, that this is a possible outcome for Bitcoin or some other currency, that it will become the global reserve currency or the new global reserve currency. And today there's no doubt that the far and away global reserve currency is the US dollar. And there have been, the euro made a very minor run at it a few years ago and didn't really get very far. And with the European financial crisis, it definitely is in no danger of becoming the global reserve currency. People sometimes talk about the yuan. That's totally impossible. It's not a convertible currency at this stage. So it really is the US dollar that is the current global reserve currency. And so the question is why? What are the key features that make it so? What are the kind of direct or indirect features, and how does that match necessarily with a cryptocurrency? I'll skip the obvious, right? Of course, dollars are fungible and divisible and all of these things, and that's definitely the case. But even within the obvious, the fact that I think it's safe to say dollars are probably more fungible than Bitcoins, right? Like Bitcoins have a history. They keep a history with them. They could conceivably be blacklisted. Now, electronic dollars definitely can be blacklisted and are blacklisted at many points in times and in different types of financial institutions. But cash cannot be in any meaningful sense. So there are still an awful lot of dollars hanging around as cash, moving around the world as cash. Probably the single greatest source of money laundering risk in the world are cash dollars. So there is, and that's because they're fungible, right? Like once you have your hands on a $50 bill, you have your hands on a $50 bill. There's no record of where it's been before, and if it's been in unsavory places, you don't need to worry about that, and you don't need to be concerned about that, because you have a $50 bill and it's just as good as anyone else's $50 bill. So, but I don't think that's why the US dollar is a reserve currency, right? The same thing applies to the euro. A 500 euro note has also been a favorite of money launderers, and doesn't mean the euro is a reserve currency. And so what are the aspects? Why are people willing to transact in dollars and hold dollars? And to me, I think there are two parts. The one part is a necessary condition, though probably not a sufficient condition. And the second part is somewhere where the magic happens. And it's fuzzy, to be honest. I think it's fuzzy. The first part is there's price stability, right? And it's a necessary condition. You're not going to be a reserve currency if someone is worried that there will be big fluctuations in short time periods. And there's no doubt that the major reserve currencies, the major sovereign currencies, are still significantly more price stable over short-term periods than any cryptocurrencies are. And, you have this constant debate in the cryptocurrency community, right? Where people sometimes say, well, yeah, but the large majority of currencies, eventually fail. And that may be true. And someday possibly the dollar might fail, but that might be 10 years from now or 20 years from now or 200 years from now. I live in Cyprus right now, and one of the pop questions I ask people is, what was the longest serving currency of Cyprus? And no one gets the answer right. It was the Byzantine currency, and it was the currency of Cyprus for 800 years. It's 2.5 times longer than the whole history of the United States. So there have been currencies that have been in place for a very long time, and 800 years is a very long time. And the types of things that make something a reserve currency don't have those types of time frames, right? Like, if you need to do a transaction in dollars in the matter of time frame of days, you can be very, very comfortable that its value isn't going to fluctuate more than half a percentage point or a percentage point with your national currency. If you're going to have a transaction that you're going to hold dollars for 6 or 12 months, again, you can be comfortable that it's probably not going to move more than 10% with your national currency. Over the course of years, if you have a fairly stable national currency of your own, I don't know, 20%, 30%, these are manageable variations. In crypto, you have 20% might be like a normal Tuesday, right? So there's definitely significantly more price stability in a major sovereign, well-managed country than there is in any cryptocurrency right now. And I think that's a very important and necessary condition. So I think that's kind of bucket one. Bucket two is, I think if I had to summarize it into one word, it's liquidity. And liquidity is a very interesting concept, and I think it's underappreciated by many non-financial people on how important it is and why it's this important. And liquidity means, in a non-technical sense, like when you want to trade, someone is there to trade with you. And someone is there to trade with you at the scale that you want to trade at, and not without a lot of slippage from whatever the price is that you think you can trade at. And so this is much easier said than done, particularly at the scale of international currencies. So I think the most traded currency pair in the world is US dollars and euros. And the amount of US dollars and euros that are traded daily is, I don't know, $6-7 trillion worth of euros and vice versa. That's massive, right? Like that, the cryptocurrency volumes today are a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that. And that's just one currency pair with the US dollar. And so what this means is, if you need to use dollars to import or export goods, or park some money overnight in treasury bonds, or make a transfer to settle a multi-billion-dollar transaction, you can be comfortable that you're not going to unsettle the US dollar euro market, right? Like, there will be liquidity there for you. You can come buy €1 billion worth of dollars, and you're not even going to be a blip on anyone's radar screen. Like, there will be a counterparty willing to sell them to you, that counterparty will be willing to sell them to you at a price that is very close to what the trading price is, and it'll be uneventful. And you sometimes see this also for third currencies, right? So like, let's say I wanted to, I don't know, switch from South African rand to Indian rupees, right? And I'm making this example up. This might not be right, but I suspect there's more liquidity and it'll be net more effective to go rand to dollars, dollars to rupee, because the rand dollars and rupee dollars pairs are probably reasonably well traded than rand rupees. And even though you have two transactions, you have two spreads, you have double transaction costs, it might be cheaper. And certainly if you have any size in your transaction, will probably definitely be cheaper, and you'll have less slippage if you run through dollars first. Because on any given day, everyone is trading in and out of dollars, even if you're in a third country, not a euro pair or a yen pair or a won pair. So I think this is a natural effect of one currency being more liquid and one economy being larger and people having more activity with a certain economy. Like, it starts there, right? Like, the US is a large trading partner for an awful lot of nations and has economic relationships with an awful lot of nations. And for the last 100 years at least, has been roughly a quarter of world GDP consistently, whatever has happened, like through world wars, through the Cold War, through the end of the Cold War, through the rise of China. Percentages everyone else moves around, the US runs at around 23, 24% of global GDP. And so the other aspects, these are kind of the obvious aspects, but the other aspects are things that are hidden from the eyes of consumers, and it has to do with kind of liquidity and treasury management for big institutions, right? Like, why do people buy treasury bonds, right? Why do people park their money in treasuries? When you take a finance class, the risk of an investment is literally defined in the finance textbook as the risk-free cost of capital, right? The capital costs something if you take it from someone, even if there's a 0% chance you won't pay it back, right? Like, if I guaranteed you knew from God, him or herself, that I would pay you back, and I took $1,000 from you, you would want something more than $1,000 a year from now when I give it back to you, even if there was no risk of me defaulting. And then there's the risk that the investment won't actually deliver what it says it was going to deliver, and I might default, or you won't get your returns you were promised, or what have you. And that's the risky part, the idiosyncratic part that has to do with that specific investment. But the risk-free rate is meant to be kind of guaranteed by God, right? And what is the typical definition of the risk-free rate is a treasury bond, like a borrowing from the US government, right? And obviously, nothing is actually 100% risk-free, but in kind of finance practice, the closest thing you can get to that is saying, like, will the US government be able to pay you back in dollars for after you have borrowed from them in dollars? And that's a pretty good bet. And so this goes to other issues of, robustness of the public financial institutions in the United States, robustness of the United States. Do you take on any particular risk that over the course of your investment, someone is going to invade the United States, depose the government, and put a new currency in place? Not likely. I mean, I suppose anything could happen, but less likely in the United States than almost any other country in the world, right? This is when people say, like, the US dollar is backed by the US military, right? It kind of means something like this, right? Like the US has enough hard power in addition to its soft power that it is likely to be stable. And when you want a reserve currency or a unit of account, excuse me, or a unit of an account currency, you want it to be stable. And one way that nation states stay stable is has to do with their own power as nation states. So this is, it flows into other areas, right? If a bank needs to borrow in dollars, swap for dollars, what have you, the U.S. dollar markets, the U.S. central banks, again, are the largest and can operate at scale and can provide liquidity behind the scenes. They can be a lender of last resort. And so I think these are the basic reasons. I think it is natural to expect. I think it's natural to expect that a reserve currency emerges, right? There are network effects that this whole concept that it makes sense there's going to be more volume rand dollars rupee than rand rupee. It's hard to get around that. Like, it's hard to design a system where that doesn't happen because it has to do with underlying trade flows and underlying economic relationships. And then I'll address what is a common point that happens here. And I think it's actually wrong. I'll be very honest, I think it's wrong. And so it's like, yeah, but if you go back to 100 years, someone actually made it in the comments, and it's a very common point. It says the purchasing power of a dollar dropped. I don't know if this number is right from the comments, but it's probably something like that, 95% in 100 years. And I'm an ex-finance person. And I look at that and I'm completely unmoved by that because that's not what you use cash for, right? There's not a single investment professional in the world who thinks to themselves, an excellent way to secure my investment returns over the next 100 years is to put them in cash, right? That's not what dollars are for. That's not what cash is for, right? Cash is there to provide liquidity over short to medium periods. And if you want investment returns, you need to invest in something that actually generates investment returns. And that could be bonds, it could be stocks, it could be precious metals, it could be commodities, it could be venture capital portfolios, it could be anything else but cash. Cash makes no representation that you should expect that cash itself is going to have an investment return. In fact, governments openly and explicitly target low levels of inflation. And the reason they do that is they're afraid of falling into deflationary spirals. And so they'd rather have a low and ideally predictable level of inflation. And so if I tell you that it is certain that this thing is going to go down 2% a year, and 2% the next year, and 2% the next year, and 2% the next year, okay. I mean, it doesn't then seem, but between now and then, over this period, you can expect its valuation to run between plus or minus 2%, what's your alternative that's more stable? There isn't one, right? It's not gold. It's not stocks. It's not commodities. Certainly not Bitcoin, right? A 2% move in Bitcoin is like 3 minutes. So Bitcoin might have upward bias in its price, but it's nothing resembling stable. It's not a price prediction. I don't know if Bitcoin's going to go up or down, but even if it goes up, that might be that Bitcoin is a good investment in the same way that buying stock in Apple 10 years ago was a good investment. But in neither case, the fact that Bitcoin goes up in value or the fact that Apple shares go up in value doesn't suggest that they should be reserve currencies used for running the gears of the financial system, right? Because for there, it's more important that it's stable and it's more important that it's predictable. And if it's predictable, I mean, truly nobody should come back after 100 years and say, oh, wow, I didn't save enough for my retirement now that I'm 130 years old because I kept my money in cash for 100 years. I mean, no one in the traditional financial system, I think, has ever suggested that, right? They suggest that you should invest in productive assets, and cash is not a productive asset. And, what's a typical portfolio? Is you have some stocks and some bonds and maybe some commodities, maybe a little bit of precious metals and other commodities and some riskier stuff, VC or timber or what have you, and fine. But the purpose of a reserved currency is not to give you investment returns. It's not to make your money grow in value. There are other things that can do that. And this is not to say, Bitcoin for sure, the last 7 years has been a better investment than US dollars. But, I mean, so what? Like, why does this matter, this discussion? Apple shares have been a better investment than US dollars. And in the next 5 years, Bitcoin might be a better or worse investment than US dollars. But so long as Bitcoin's daily liquidity is a few minutes worth of liquidity in US dollars, it's not going to become a reserve currency. Right. And I know the comment is continuing and it's classical and they're valid statements for the past, but will it mean it does not change? I have no idea if it's going to change, but neither does anyone else. Right? Like all we can look at, I try and be objective. I am as big a fan of Bitcoin as you're going to find on planet Earth. But I look at the facts in front of me the way they are, not the way I want them to be. And the facts in front of me tell me that if I want to have a stable store of value between now and next Tuesday, US dollars are much, much better than Bitcoins. That doesn't mean I don't own some Bitcoins. I do. And I hope they go up in value. It's great. I mean, I'm not counting on it. My retirement's not counting on it. And if they go up in value, I will think to myself, oh, I've made a good investment. But I won't think to myself necessarily, this is how I should have. Let's say, I mean, think of a real example, right? I'm going to buy a house in 10 days and I sign a contract and I'm going to put the money aside with a lawyer in trust to give to the seller. You couldn't do that today with Bitcoin. By the time you close the transaction, it might be worth 10, 20% more or less. Might that change in the future? Yes, maybe. 7 years ago, liquidity of Bitcoin was nothing. Now that's something. But the something that it is still very low relative to traditional financial assets. So what's the possible theory that Bitcoin's a reserve asset? Well, you're many years down the road, issuance has slowed down, a lot of people have bought it, and it's now stable because a lot of people have bought it. Okay. I can tell you it'll be much less exciting to people once it's stable, right? Most of the activity on Bitcoin is like, woohoo, I'm going to make money, right? So it can't simultaneously be like the unit of account and it's going to go up like 5% a week. right? So you can get one of those too. All right. So, and it's funny because I see those things conflated by people who want both of those to be true, and they can't both be true, right? So the it might get there, but then it'll be less exciting as an investment opportunity if it's stable. So one or the other. You can't have. I don't think you can have both. In any case, today there's no doubt that the king of the financial system, is the US dollar in terms of what's the global reserve currency, how do you do transactions, how can you move anything with any certain liquidity. It's a US dollar world. And that might change in the future, but that's today's world that we live in. Okay. Spoke a lot about that, but I think it's actually a very important question because this comes up a lot, and there's a lot behind it. A couple other ones that are actually super related, and now that we did all that, we can actually talk about them. Does an inelastic supply curve assets such as Bitcoin risk the creation of hyperdeflation? E.g., Bitcoin could encourage even more hoarding of the currency. I have a very standard answer to this. The answer is sure, it could, if it was the national unit of account. If it is not the national unit of account, then it won't. So that's why people like to have national units of accounts that are slightly inflationary. So this doesn't happen. So if someone said, country X, Morocco said, my unit of account is Bitcoin, I think they would risk that it is deflationary. But if it's not the national unit of account, then it doesn't matter, right? Like Apple stock is going up in value and everything is deflating. The last 10 years, the purchasing price of a share of Apple has skyrocketed. The purchasing power of a share of Apple has skyrocketed in terms of every other thing on planet Earth. Okay. It's not putting the world economy into a deflationary spiral because we don't price things in shares of Apple stocks, right? We don't come and say, like, I'd like an ice cream. I would like an ice cream, and say, great, we would like 0.0005 shares of Apple for your ice cream, right? So if we did, it would be problematic that Apple is going up in value. So I think this is only an issue if you make Bitcoin your national currency. Someone asked in the comments, what about for countries where dollars aren't available and they have high inflation and the currency is losing value? Yeah, if you can get your hands on some Bitcoin, that's super. Just like if you get your hands on any other non-inflationary asset, it's super. So those things are different, though, than saying, here is country A or B or C that is making a complete mess of their central banking system, like Venezuela. And therefore, this also applies to a country like the United States, which isn't. It's not like Venezuela is following good central banking practices, and that's how they ended up how they are, right? Venezuela, in the view of traditional central bankers, is doing everything wrong. And when they do everything wrong, then they have terrible results. And so I'm not sure it proves anything other than the Venezuelan government is managing their currency and their economy, utterly horribly. And if you're Venezuelan and you can get your hands on dollars or Bitcoins or basically anything other than the Venezuelan bolivar, yes, you're better off. But okay, not that easy to get your hands on Bitcoins either, right? Like for the same reason, it's not that easy to get your hands on dollars. So unless you find some way to do work, like here are where the things that could happen, right? People are saying, oh, I'm doing video game playing and getting paid in Bitcoins. Yeah, that's good. That can't be shut down the way kind of a dollar wire transfer can be shut down in the Venezuelan system. So the fact that Bitcoin is more decentralized than dollars. And if you can find some mechanism to get paid in Bitcoin while living in Venezuela, there is probably a broader set of ways you can get paid in Bitcoin while living in Venezuela than you can get paid in dollars while living in Venezuela. But it's still pretty narrow, right? Like, I'm not sure if you're a normal worker in Venezuela, how you actually get your hands on Bitcoin and who's going to pay you in Bitcoin and who's going to like exchange Bitcoin for you. Because it's not like, because right, either you need to get paid in Bitcoin or someone has to decide they want to give you their Bitcoin in exchange for Venezuelan bolivars. Hard to imagine who the second person's going to be, right? Like, why would they want that? So then you have to find some way to get paid in Bitcoin. Well, to get paid in Bitcoin, someone has to have Bitcoin in the first place. And then it's likely not to be a Venezuelan that's going to want to give it to you because they've just gotten their hands on some Bitcoin. That's great. Let's hold on to it, right? So you need something that's someone's paying from outside Venezuela, and you can deliver some service through the internet, and they can pay you in Bitcoin. Yeah, that's pretty good. But it's a niche case still. It's still a niche case. All right. Do you think a government will really accept a currency with no central authority? Are cryptocurrencies inevitable? A central government will not accept a cryptocurrency as their own currency. They will accept it as a form of commodity. That's the answer. It is when central banks get all agitated about cryptocurrency, they get agitated when people are saying the word currency. They get agitated. It makes sense. Like, it's kind of their job. And so whether they're right or wrong, I mean, it's literally their job. Oh, we're going to replace you. And I say, well, we don't like that. And here's all the problems with what will happen if you replace me. And so the this is something that when you put the hat currency on it, you see central bankers get nutty. And if you tell them, oh, look, it's an investment, it's a commodity, it has nothing to do with you, then they get much more relaxed. They'll say, fine, I don't have to worry about, as a central banker, I don't worry about the price of oil. And I don't worry in particular about the price of shares of Apple. And so I don't have to worry about Bitcoin. And that's fine. Then I can go along doing the type of central bankery things that I'm doing and not have to worry about these things too much. And so I think that's going to be the answer in the intermediate term. I think that's the right way to go about it, because on the full frontal assault of like, we're replacing the central bank with this private cryptocurrency, A, I'm not sure the case for it is very good. And B, even if it was, no government's going to accept that, or no serious government's going to accept that. And you're just going to get in a head-on battle for something you might not even want to win anyway. Right? Like, what I think is the most exciting part about Bitcoin is that it is a global, permissionless, more or less uncensorable, more or less decentralized value transfer mechanism. That is something that is super, super, super interesting, super, super, super valuable, never existed before, and that we haven't even begun to explore 1/10 of 1/10 of 1% of what can happen now that you have that. You don't have to load onto that, and the European Central Bank's going to go away, and Bitcoin is going to take over their function. I mean, A, I doubt it. I don't think that's actually going to happen. But B, if it happens, it's no time soon. And so C, let's worry about all the things that you can do today with Bitcoin, of which we've done like 1/10 of 1% of them. Right? So I think that's the answer. And if it's positioned that way, I don't think the banks are going to care too much. The central banks are going to care too much. Similar, if cryptocurrencies do not fit the economic or legal definition of money, ECB report, does it mean they can only be used as a form of contractual money, means of payment? If two people use crypto as a form of payment, how can ECB define what is and isn't money? Look, there's a difference between saying something is legal tender and so you can have a guarantee as a person that like you can settle a balance in it, and two people want to transact with a certain mechanism. On the latter, the government doesn't get bothered at all. If I want to go to Andreas Vlachos and say, I am going to trade you my microphone for your basketball, neither of which the European Central Bank will consider a form of money, that's perfectly fine. No one's going to stop us, right? And if it turns out basketballs get really popular as a form of trade here and around the University of Nicosia, and we start trading basketballs back and forth, super, right? Now, does that mean I can show up at the supermarket and go get a carton of eggs and say, I demand that you get paid in basketballs? No. The supermarket's going to say, yeah, no, we'd really like euros, please. No, that's what we take. We don't take basketballs. So I think it's like that. It's very implausible that any serious country anytime soon is going to say, we will force people to accept bitcoins in terms of a settlement of a balance. But that doesn't mean that all types of people could voluntarily accept bitcoins for all types of reasons. And so I think that's realistically what's going to happen. Similarly, will cryptos ever be able to really be used for day-to-day payments and ultimately replace fiat, or will they become one more instrument in banks' investment portfolios? It's a good question. I mean, for sure, the top usage case of Bitcoin so far is investing, not anything else. Will there be day-to-day payments with cryptos? What's your definition of cryptos? Private cryptos? Like, will there be like, I think machine-to-machine payments are going to be in cryptos, right? For sure. I don't see any other way that it can be. Like, our world is going to get more digital. You're going to have a lot more transactions that are machine intermediated, and logically, they're going to be cryptos. Will we be at scale paying for our coffee in crypto? If crypto means a national cryptocurrency, like will there be a crypto dollar, a trade? Well, it'll definitely be that. It'll definitely be that. And that will definitely happen. But will we at scale use Bitcoin to pay for our coffee? Only if the price stabilizes, I think. Otherwise, it's an aggravation, and it's an aggravation tax-wise, right? Like unless there becomes some level of exemption from capital gains taxes for transactions below a certain size, that is also it's a big nuisance. Because technically speaking, in the US and in quite a few other countries, every time you do a transaction in cryptocurrency, you are doing a disposal of an asset, and you should recognize a capital gains or loss. And so that's a nuisance. So I think you'd probably want some tax, if not relief is not the right word, some tax flexibility on those topics to help. Okay, of the three options below, this is interesting. Which do you believe the ECB fears, and this is in quotes, the most? Virtual money can only be used for virtual goods and services with no broad conversion to and from real economy money. Virtual money can be used for virtual and real goods and services with broad conversion only from real economy money to virtual money, but not the opposite. Virtual money can be used for virtual and real goods and services with broad conversion from real economy money to virtual money and the opposite. So I guess the thing that changes between these things is its convertibility to and from real economy money. I believe the first one they don't fear at all. If you want to have funny money that is not convertible back and forth to euros, so in-game money in a video game, I believe they do not fear this or care about it whatsoever. I believe the one that they would fear the most, but I want to be clear why I think they fear it, is when you have convertibility in both directions. And the reason is their major concern is money laundering. And so if you want to do any major amount of money laundering, ultimately, one of the things that's always interesting, we're going to use Monero to do money laundering, and that's fine. But like at some point, you're going to spend it on something in the real economy, and then your neighbor is going to wonder why you, Mr. Public Servant with a 2,000 euro salary, suddenly own a Ferrari, right? So ultimately, while we are still physical human beings, which I think we will be for the foreseeable future, ultimately people want to spend things in goods and services in the real world, right? And so this is where a lot of governments are putting the choke points on the conversion to and from cryptocurrencies or virtual currencies and sovereign currencies under the, I think, reasonable theory that at some point, for this whole criminal exercise to make sense, someone's going to want to buy a house, a car, a nice dinner, a Ferrari, and that's the point where it's good to see where the money came from. And so that I believe is the major. When I'm on the National Blockchain Committee for Cyprus, and kind of the major regulatory concern is money laundering, and that it doesn't become a channel for money laundering. And then the second concern, but I think quite a good ways down, is that it's kind of like retail consumer protection, right? That someone doesn't trick people with scammy ICOs, of which there were a lot, right? And just like violates a bunch of securities laws. Beyond that, I think that's most of it. Like, I really don't think most governments are, for better or for worse, and I think this is good, and I think it's good for cryptocurrency, and I think it's good because the governments are right. They're not really worried that Bitcoin is going to become the global reserve currency and all their currencies are going to collapse, and therefore we must take huge measures against this. Like, maybe they're horribly wrong. Maybe they're horribly wrong, and that's what happens. But if so, Bitcoin's going to catch them napping, because I don't think anyone's worried about that. So there's an interesting comment that says, simply don't buy a Ferrari. Plain and simple, live a meager existence in your country of birth or country of your passport. While that is excellent life advice in general, and almost certainly a better way to maximize your happiness than buying a Ferrari, generally, people go and engage in criminal activities exactly so they can go buy these goods and services. So if you're going to live a meager existence in your country of birth, then there's probably no purpose for you going and doing all these ambitious criminal activities in the first place. And so you can save yourself an awful lot of aggravation by just saying, great, I want to live a normal life at a normal standard of living, and I don't have to do any of these things. I don't have to go commit the crime in the first place that I will then need to money launder the money from the crime. So it's the simple solution to all of these issues. Okay. Is the central bank's attitude towards digital currencies ultimately going to be decided by the politics of the state in which that central bank is located? Yes. And people will be all over the map in how they do it, but yes. So I'm not going to go into that in more detail. I think it's for sure the case. Who are the shareholders of a central bank? Can it be privately owned? So this is interesting because this always generates all types of conspiracy theories. Generally, it has to do with the Federal Reserve, and the independent reserve banks are sort of like private corporations, etc., etc., etc. But I think for the purposes of practicality, it is correct to imagine that central banks are generally public entities. Like, I think that's the sensible way to think about it. They used to be, in some cases, private entities, but kind of modern central banks from about the middle of the 20th century are effectively public entities. And I think that's the simplifying assumption to think about it. If central banks, ECB, Federal Reserve, and BIS is allowed to have their own blockchain, is it still deemed fit to be called a decentralized system? Good question. Who knows? It depends on the design of the blockchain. And it's also the case that decentralization is a spectrum, not a binary switch. Nothing is fully centralized. Nothing is fully decentralized, including Bitcoin, including the US dollar. All those US dollars moving around in cash around the world are pretty decentralized, right? Those US dollars, the cash is more decentralized than the Bitcoin blockchain, I think. Like, there's really no nodes of concentration there. I think realistically, central banks could make decentralized currencies, and that's what they should do, right? Like, if I was in charge of a central bank, which I'm not for obvious reasons, is you would say, I am going to do a Bitcoin-like blockchain. I'll issue 50 billion US dollars worth of US dollar coins. And how will I turn it into a stable coin? Very simply. I will say I am a buyer of seller of these things at exactly $1. Right? You can make the market in US dollars most convincingly if you're the US Treasury, right? You're never going to run out of US dollars. Right? So this is a sorry, if you're the Federal Reserve. This is a way to have a actual stable coin with the permissionless nature of Bitcoin. But they won't do it because they'll freak out about anti-money laundering, and so they'll try and do it on some type of private blockchain with validation and all these other things. And that's fine. That still might be interesting. It still might be interesting. And it will be clearly more centralized than a private cryptocurrency. But centralization and decentralization is a spectrum. Even Bitcoin needs to decentralize more. Still too centralized. Mining is reasonably centralized. There should be more nodes. Not enough nodes, in my opinion. But mining in particular is reasonably centralized. So we still have work to do, I think, on decentralization. Andreas, there's a comment. I hope Andreas is tuned into this. Yes, now Andreas clearly has different views on financial systems than I do. That's for sure. And I admire his views because they are very strong and aggressively ambitious. Let's say, right? Like he says, I like to see Andreas debate Antonis. I don't think it would be a debate, to be honest, because I understand conceptually where he's coming from. I'm just not sure if practically tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, like any of that is actually going to happen. So it's more a question of, hey, tomorrow I want to move the ball forward another yard and move the ball forward another yard. And, he wants to defund the government so they don't do war. Like he wants to bring world peace, which is a very noble thing to do. And I'm not going to get on the other side of the debate and be like, I'm in favor of world war. I'm not. It would be better if governments don't go around shooting people in other countries. Right. And so he wants to defund government's abilities to fund wars. And so I'm not going to object to that. But if I said, how can you do X tomorrow? Well, if you want to do X tomorrow, this is how the system works today and tomorrow, and what things I think you can get done today or tomorrow. And maybe the day after that, you can do something a little bit more. So I don't think it would be a debate so much. I don't think it will be a debate so much of we have, I'm going to say he's wrong or he's going to say I'm wrong. I think it's a matter maybe of time frames and of how ambitious one is about how things evolve. We'll see, though. We'll see. I am open to what the outcomes are. Can you provide an overview of the Petro? Yeah, the Petro. What's the idea? Who will use it? What problem are they solving? And I will try and answer this without laughing, right? It's like the worst ICO of all time, ever. It doesn't even make any sense theoretically, right? Like the idea is the tokens are somehow backed by petroleum in Venezuela. But there's really no mechanism by which that actually is true, right? Like nothing. It's literally just made up. It's not like you can take a Petro token somewhere and say, I can legally enforce this Petro token and get a barrel of Venezuelan oil in exchange for this Petro token. So before we get to anything too advanced about all the other stuff that's wrong with the Petro, the whole concept is just made up, right? Like everything about, like its core concept is just made up. Like no one has ever pointed out how the Petro is convertible to barrels of oil that you could then say, sure, this is giving it a price stability. Meanwhile, like all the rest of the stuff doesn't make any sense, right? Like it's still going to be sanctioned, so no one's going to send any money to them, right? Like I have zero confidence in their ability to like run the token correctly. The price is going to be wherever. The convertibility and tradability is going to be whatever. I mean, it's literally like the worst ICO of all time. Like Matt Levine had an excellent article about this. Hold on. I am going to copy paste it for you guys. Here, I'm going to steal his language because it's very, very good. So I'm literally just going to read it because I don't think I can write it better than this. I keep reading that the Petro is a cryptocurrency that is backed by oil. What does this mean? First of all, it means you need to trust Venezuelan's government to exchange oil for petros. Obviously, the petro does not give you a security interest in any oil. So the petro is an unsecured oil index debt of a government that is sliding into default and that has been barred from the international debt markets. But it's worse than that. Venezuela doesn't even promise to give you any oil. The oil peg is just this quote: the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela guarantees that it will accept petros as a form of payment of national taxes, fees, contributions, and public services, taking as a reference the price of the barrel of the Venezuelan basket of the previous day with a percentage discount of DV. Imagine that someone told you, without using words like crypto or blockchain, that Venezuela was planning to issue perpetual zero coupon unsecured debt that could be used to pay taxes in Venezuela at a valuation pegged to the price of oil, but that Venezuelans wouldn't be able to buy that debt. I think it'll be fairly clear that there is no use case for that debt. The Venezuelans who could use the debt to pay taxes, can't buy it with their bolivars. The foreigners who can buy it will get nothing from it. It doesn't pay interest and can't be redeemed for cash. It's simply a joke, a product for nobody. But if you add on the blockchain, then that somehow obscures all of the actual economics of the product. I cannot do better than that description. It is exactly what the petro is. It's literally the worst ICO of all time. So it is just like Venezuela is giving an excellent masterclass on how not to run a traditional central bank. It is right up there giving an excellent masterclass on how not to launch a national cryptocurrency. So with that, we have come to the end of our hour. And, if you want to laugh or cry, I'm not sure, read all of Matt Levine's article about the petro, because it literally is exactly what one should not do if you're a government launching a cryptocurrency. Thank you, everyone, for the session. Very good questions, really good discussion in the comments, and we will see you all next week.